Welcome back to the Make It Your Business podcast. This is the podcast where I don't prepare an intro and should, but where myself, Duncan Casey, and James Murray of the glorious James Murray Finance, we talk about our experience as entrepreneurs, as startup owners, as business owners, from the coalface, from the trenches, as it were, and we hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, please stick around. Today we're going to talk about the Spring Statement. We're going to talk a bit about the Netflix series Adolescence, and kind of what we can draw from both in terms of being small business owners and marketers and all that stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe, please like and comment, leave us a review if you're listening to this on a podcast platform. We'd certainly really appreciate that. Let's get all that SEO algorithm stuff out of the way. But James, hi.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. And we're in a different venue this time. We're trying a few different things out. This is my lovely office.
Yes.
Today,
Yeah.
so I don't know whether the sound will be good. We've got some builders outside today, so we won't have hail. We might have just building works.
Yeah. And I'm of course looking remarkably amateur with my handheld mic, but I didn't bring my desk clamp today.
This is a work in progress.
Yeah.
And everybody can see we're working on perfection. We're not quite there yet.
Well, it's a meta comment. Shall we? It's subtextual about being a small business owner, a scrappy business owner.
Yeah.
Let's say it's deliberate.
Well, should we get straight to it? You mentioned Adolescence there. I think
Yeah.
it's quite topical. Have you watched it?
I have. Yes. Yeah.
You watched the whole thing?
I have.
You're obviously a trained actor.
I am.
From an actor's perspective, what's your initial thoughts on it? How do you feel about it?
Certainly from a performance standpoint, I think it's incredibly well acted. I did a film called One More Shot, which is currently available if you're in the UK on Sky Cinema or Now TV, and I think in the States it's on Netflix. We were number 4.
It's very good.
Yeah, thank you. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Oh.
You told me to watch it.
I did. Yeah. On pain of death. So I've done single one take films before, and that was one we spent a lot of time. We went through Stansted Airport here, literally plotting it out, finding where all the cut points would be and stuff like that. So that Adolescence was not shot. They're very good at hiding cut points now, and they've become very adept at doing that. I know one of the ones that kind of got a lot of publicity was that shot of the kid running out of the classroom and then it kind of taking off and going over and finding
the drone piece, and then it comes back down again.
I've done shots like that before. So I did a film called, it was retitled by the distributor as Wicked Witches, which is desperately unoriginal, but anyway, whatever. We did that. So we had an octocopter drone it had a electromagnet that could pick up a Ronin, and a Ronin is like a Steadicam rig, and so you could have with that one we did a few shots, usually starting aerial. So we did a top-down shot of me arriving in a car, getting out, and the idea was to then find me go into a shop, which is impossible really if you think about it, because obviously how could a drone do that? And you'd have to hide an operator in the shot somewhere as like an extra who could then do it. The thing you notice, and the thing I noticed about that shot, and this is, I don't want to get into the reason, but like,
go and get technical.
Performance-wise, again, coming back to the performance, there's a girl that it finds, right? And I knew this was going to happen. So like, whilst they're trying to get this thing onto the drone, they've got to stay on that girl who's waiting at the crossing or whatever. And she's
clamp it on.
Yeah, so she's trying to sell, sort of looking around and stuff. And performance-wise, that's really awkward because she's just waiting for them to do that. So she's sitting there going, oh, no. And she's great. Don't get me wrong, it's not a diss on anyone involved, but it's that thing of, okay, she's got to find business to do while they hook up the camera to the drone, and then it can take off. Okay, now we can take off. And it's great. It's fine. I mean, I think, and I said this to my wife until she told me to shut up when I was watching it. I think that the one take thing has its limitations as a storytelling device. I think when we did it with One More Shot, bearing in mind that's an action film, it has a video game quality to it because you're invariably following people from behind, and you're doing. From a performance standpoint, it's tricky because you can never so normally as an actor when you work on film like we're doing today, we've got 3 cameras. You'll work. Won't necessarily work multicam. You tend to do that on soaps. So soaps will shoot multicam because it's quicker.
Yeah. So
you can cut around different things. Usually single cam shoots, you'll find that you'll have, the day will be, you start coverage, so you get your wides which is that camera over there. Then you get your ones, which we've got singles on ours. And that will be done, instead of done like this, you'll have one camera, so you have one setup. Once you finish doing the wide shot, everyone out, reset, relight, everything for someone's singles. And then you do the whole scene that way, and then out, everyone reset, camera goes.
A lot of editing work in the back end. Then.
Well, editing wise, it's harder because you have to cut around. Like, so as a performer, it's harder because you have to maintain continuity. So if you scratched your nose over a certain line in the wide, you need to remember to do it in your single. Otherwise, the editor's going to have a tough time cutting those together. And often you do see that. If you look out for it in TV and film, you'll notice like a lot of inconsistencies in hair and ties. And ties are the big tie knots are my thing, right? So typically, the sound engineers will hide your lav mic in your tie knot. If you're wearing a tie, that's the perfect place. So sometimes they'll cut a hole in the back of the shirt and feed the cable through and round the collar and into the tie. And if you watch anything like Suits, the TV show Suits, I'm always looking at it. Every now and again you'll see in the tie crease, the dimple, if you like, at the bottom of there'll be a little like thing broken out, and you'll always see it as well as like the tie knots look incredibly loose, and it's because they've got out of wardrobe and then sound have come in and fiddled about with their tie knot, and it's like, right, don't touch that. And it's like and it looks terrible. Anyway, so
it's really interesting from a perspective of somebody that's not trained in this and hasn't seen behind the scenes. And I think for me, when I watched it, that element, and I've watched the whole thing now, and without giving any spoilers, I mainly found it a bit of a tough watch at times, and there was some quite interesting scenes, but at the same time, the thing for me, and I think one of the reasons that it got all of its plaudits and accolades, is the authenticity of the performance, the uniqueness of it, because we don't see many TV shows these days that are produced in that way and are filmed like that. And I think the audience really appreciated something different, something that was producing not the normal sort of thing that we watch on the daily sort of Netflix shows that come out all the time.
Yeah, I suppose the devil's advocate view, and I remember saying this to my wife when we were watching it, like that first episode where he's nicked, right? We start on with the cops going in and nicking him, and because you're doing it because you're doing it single take, you are limited to where. So the journey to the police station has to be covered.
Yeah.
Now, do you there's a choice, right? Do you stay with him, the cop, or do you stay with the family? Now, the dramatic thing would be to cut back and forth. So if you weren't doing it one take, you'd go, because we want to see the impact on Stephen Graham and everyone else, and
you're sacrificing that dramatic side of it for the pacing, the more authentic, the dirty bits as such.
I suppose that word authenticity. The problem with saying it's authentic is it's kind of like, okay, so if you're committing to this ultra realism where everything's got to be realistic, that falters when there are things sacrificed for the sake of there being a roaming camera that has to hide, all the operators, everyone's got to be hidden. So bearing in mind it's a 360 set, it's very hard to shoot that, because we did it when we were doing, like, we're shooting at Stansted, for example, all the crew, so all like Video Village, which is where you typically put the bank of monitors and where the director would sit and the producer probably, and
what do they call that?
Video Village. Typically, so that's where all the guff goes, all the boxes of stuff, and it's on set but it's hidden somewhere, but it's so everyone can watch monitors and keep an eye on what's going on, script supervisor, everyone, that has to go, like that has to be parked somewhere, and especially if you're traveling through the set, that then has to be in a completely different location, and that's fine, but it means that your focus puller, your sound guy, the people who typically are right behind the camera have to be, a unit moving around, and it limits how you can move the camera. It obviously limits reflective surfaces in the set.
They must have to go beforehand and see there's no mirrors here and there's nothing reflective of the oven isn't going to see the cameraman in the background, whereas you could go back afterwards.
You can remove those things in post. I mean, there's that shot in Inception. Do you remember Inception where Leonardo DiCaprio and Ellen Page, now Elliot Page, stand in those mirrors come around them, and there's a 360 shot of the camera, and you go, well, where's the reflection of the camera? That was just digitally removed in post. Okay, so you can do those things.
Yeah.
But obviously they're time intensive, expensive, all that kind of stuff. So it limits. What I mean by all this is it dramatically it starts to limit the realism from the point of view that those actors then have to wait for the camera to be on them before they do their how you pace a scene is then fenced
you're
in,
controlling
right?
the pace
Like
based on when the camera then can come around and see you to get the maximum effect from that moment.
Exactly. I mean, you talked about and I don't want to give away spoilers, but there's a scene in that last episode where the last episode has that thing of the family being at home and then getting in the car and going, and there's a reveal in that scene, for example, that happens over a phone call in the van, which is like, that's the only way to do that, because otherwise you have to change the story that they either go and see his son or, and it's just done over the phone. And because of where the camera is in that scene, the impact of it on the characters is a lot because it's behind them.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So it's harder to show. Normally you would then cut to close-ups of someone's face, or show the impact.
Well, there would have been a court scene, or it would have probably been done completely differently.
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
or you just cut back to him on the phone. You usually typically cut between two people having a phone call, right? And so that's what I mean. It's not that it's not real, because obviously it is very realistic. But what I mean is it. And then we play out how that impacts. It's realistic because they're with their daughter, right? And so they try and hold it in until they're alone in the bedroom, and then it comes out. So that is, I guess, realistic. And again, but it's your storytelling. What I mean is, I suppose your storytelling is then limited to what you can do. So
I guess coming back round to it, and my point with it is that I think that, for all the limitations of the storytelling, I think one of the reasons people found it so intriguing is the fact that it was different.
Yeah.
And bringing that back round to how that might be reflective or be a microcosm of our audiences as business owners or entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, anybody trying to stand out in a crowded market, compete in an ever-changing world where cost of information is coming down. It's quite nice to know that something like this can be produced and people appreciate it for that element of authenticity, for them making a bit of extra effort and doing something different.
Yeah.
And I just think as a business owner, that gives me a bit of hope that customers, when you are looking to sell a product or a service, how can you put that into your business and try and think, or in what you do in your day-to-day work, to make yourself stand out and make your business stand out.
I think the marketing takeaway for me has been, the subject matter of Adolescence is what has gotten it talked about in Parliament. It's got it talked about, on the news. It's had a life beyond just its release, and I think, it's hard to sort of say, okay, well, so the takeaway is talk about Palestine in your bit. It's not, because the problem is a lot of this stuff then becomes contentious, and as we know, like politically. It's very difficult to have conversations without nowadays. I mean, I have a degree in politics, and I did that at a time when most people weren't that political. And I think since social media's come about, everyone has suddenly become very politicized.
Since 2020 as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I think, I think as the series, I think it manages to sort of strike a balance and not particularly come down on, it's not trying to paint its flag to it's not being partisan particularly. No. I don't think. Obviously, some people have interpreted it that way, but then they interpret everything that way, don't they?
Yeah, having some criticism sometimes isn't a bad thing, is it?
No, and I think that I think it as a series, it doesn't beat you over the head with anything like that. Obviously, it talks about a very a subject matter that is topical, and I don't see it as having been written in a way to sort of stoke up anything, but I think. And it's probably an accident more than anything that it's kind of then it just got into that news cycle enough to have...
Yeah, and I think Stephen Graham was saying that he wanted it, because I think he co-wrote it or directed it, and I think he wanted to... his main agenda with it was to raise awareness for parents, and some of the language was interesting, when the children are talking about understanding and dissecting Instagram messages.
Yeah.
The police officers, and again, I don't think this gives too many spoilers away, but they didn't really understand this communication that was happening within these texts, and they'd actually misunderstood what was being being transmitted in those messages.
Yeah.
So, and that is quite interesting to know, and it does raise a bit of awareness. And you think, actually, what we think we understand as communication will be very different for the next generation. They say that, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but the youngest generation coming through at the moment, the children at school, will be able to communicate a lot more emotionally via emojis and text, more so than we will,
right?
Because we've not grown up with it. So whereas we might need to speak to somebody face to face, or at least vocally, they'll be able to communicate a lot better, a lot more emotionally to text-based information.
Right. Yeah. No, it is an interesting point, and I think, you know, as a parent, I mean, and then that's another thing, isn't it? That because people have obviously said, you know, it's about the book, and there's issues around masculinity and that kind of thing. And there's that episode where she's asking about masculinity and stuff. But again, I don't think it comes down on one side of the fence with another. But you know, what I think a lot of people miss is that the girl who is the victim in it, ultimately, she's not shown as like pure innocent whatever, because she was baiting him with, like, she was bullying him essentially.
Yeah.
And like you say, using those kind of coded messages, and I do think, you know, as a parent, I worry. I think though, what you're seeing, that and this is, you know, an example of, is where, as I mean, I'm a late millennial, so I'm but just in the cusp of being a millennial, and I'm
clinging on to that.
Yeah, I'll die on that hill. But you know, I think you're more in that camp than I am. But we grew up with it. I started in the 80s, right, the mid 80s. There was, you know, computers weren't everywhere. There was, you know, and then as we were kind of going through our adolescence, that's when like the internet came about, and then, you know, so we've seen a world without it and a world with it, and we've kind of grown with it. And I don't think we're not out of the race in terms of technology, but we understand the progression of it a lot more than kids who were born just into it, and it's just there. And I think our parents are the ones who struggle to really grasp what, you know, I'm aware of the internet and of all the you know, the potential pitfalls for my kids, and so I am like, right, that's it, you're not having a phone until you're older, because I understand
the curve was bigger for our parents, whereas I guess the shifts are smaller. Like any technology, once it's been introduced, it's like an iPhone nowadays. They're incremental, the changes and the updates that you get.
I think so. I mean, obviously we've got AI to contend with, which is
and that's obviously fast moving, but that will be the same eventually. It will become the norm, and there will just be small tweaks as you go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the only other thing I wanted to talk about today was we've had the spring statement. The wonderful Rachel Reeves has announced the updates, which for me, I just feel are very they were very much expected, and it might be a bit controversial, but I think separates the overall message that I get from it is that the working and middle class, that separation between the super rich just becomes further. The divide gets bigger. I feel that a lot of the economic plans put in place don't help support SMEs in any real way. It puts a tax burden massively on the middle class, which probably make up 40 to 60% of the changes that happen. And I think overall, it can become a bit disheartening listening to these sort of statements, which you need to be aware of, and I think we all need to practically understand what they mean, but also separate them a little bit from our everyday lives and what we actually do and what we implement into our businesses and our personal lives, because otherwise it can become a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, I have avoided till now talking about politics on the internet too much, but I am across it a lot.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't talk on the internet.
Don't talk on the internet. You know, I have a degree in politics, as I say. It's something I follow very closely, and it is a pitfall sometimes to fall into like the macro politics, the geopolitics of it all. Obviously, we've had a strong lesson in the last few years about the impact of geopolitics, though, and it's something that you do need to be aware of. I think with the spring statement, I think we've got ourselves into a doom loop, and this is not a partisan point, because I think the Conservatives have this problem as well.
Yeah.
And I think Labour are, you know, I think the problem is they've come in and they've wanted to put in a bunch of redistributive policies, such as, employer national insurance and all that kind of thing. But the problem is that it's simply translated as an employment tax. And as you say, you've basically got this middle class that's being squeezed because there's wealth flight at the top. And that's, as much as, proponents of left-wing thinking would like to ignore it, it is a factor that if you overburden the most wealthy people, they have the ability to leave and take their money elsewhere, and they will. And whether you moralise about that as much as you want, but they'll do it.
The irony is this, and we're talking about this. We're not talking about a millionaire that's maybe got a property and a few £100,000 in the bank here. I'm talking about multi-millionaires, and that they are less impacted by some of the tax changes. Yeah, it might hit them, but they also have the flexibility to move, whereas the people that are more sort of stationed and are trying to work towards wealth, and by wealth I mean financial security, being able to maybe retire one day, support their children, have a home under their head, under their head,
live on the roof.
Yes, under the roof. And that's what we're talking about there. And I just personally feel that there are policies in place where you could say, yes, you need to tax the wealthy more, tax the working class and the middle class less, and that doesn't also work. So you need to find a model that does. But the problem is we don't have a huge say in it, and we've got so little influence. So all you can try and do, and all it does for me, is it emphasises the point that you need to be as innovative as you can and try and create the best world you can for you, your family, your friends, your network, and try and be consistent in that world, because ultimately there's only so much you can do, and you really, the governments, the councils aren't going to, as this spring statement sort of emphasises, they're not going to be there to support those entrepreneurial people. I mean, with this recent statement, there is a bit more money being taken away maybe from that middle side, and you want to create a ladder where everybody feels that they can continuously be climbing it and making steps towards improving their lives, and everybody's in a unique situation, whereas it all feels that a lot of those rungs in the ladder have been removed.
Well, you make a good point there, because I think what a lot of these policies tend to do, and the discourse around them is based, it forgets social and wealth mobility. So it talks about the rich, the middle class, and the working class, and it's like, yes, but people aspire, and I should think most people, especially in the working class and middle classes, are aspiring to, they're working to achieve a higher, I mean, the class system in this country is sort of nebulous now anyway. It's kind of, what does that mean?
It doesn't.
It really doesn't, there's no, I suppose, yes, there are landed gentry still about, fine, whatever, but, most people probably fit into middle class. I mean, if you just divide it up by, like, salary, then you've got plumbers and electricians who are earning more than someone working in a data center, or it's like, how do you, who's got a degree, it's like, it's really erroneous when you think about it, but you're right. I think the problem with these policies, and they therefore sort of almost de facto remove those rungs because they go, well, you're in there, so you're going to get taxed like that, and you go, yeah, but it's like we're still on an emergency tax since World War II. Every year they have to renew the tax system because it's based on a war footing thing. Now we're kind of getting back to that, unfortunately, but it needs complete review. But the problem is you then have to deal with HMRC. You've got the quote unquote blob who will resist change, and I do understand why, but at the same time it's like this, it really needs rethinking, because it's so complicated and it's so punitive in so many ways that people probably don't even realise how punitive it is. And obviously there's been that thing recently about Fish Fryers Association now, because of Ed Miliband's green policies, therefore they are going to be told they have to switch to electric fryers rather than gas fryers, which is going to put their prices up, which is going to, and we're getting into stagflation is something they've talked about as a result of all this, because you've got wage increase, inflation. What is it? Inflation with stagnant growth, like no growth. Right?
Yeah, really. So, I mean, so it's all very well, because I think Keir Starmer put out a tweet, or what do you call an X tweet now? Is it still a tweet?
He X'd.
A post. He put a post out on X.
all over the internet.
And he was they sort of clipped up all the positive things. And I'm a big advocate for you. You can find an argument in any sort of area you want if you want to find the right bits. And he was sort of saying about, inflation is slowed and there's more jobs and everything else, but it doesn't tell the true story. And I think at the end of the day, you need a system in place that's going to help support people. We need to protect the vulnerable. We need to look after the people that can't do things, but that money needs to come from other places. And then you need to create a system that has an infrastructure where you are rewarding hard work. We want to live in a meritocracy, really, don't we? We want people to go out there and create something, and if they're on £30,000 a year, give them an incentive to go and earn 40, 50, not double down on the tax because they've hit a certain banding and then remove. One of the craziest things in this country is if you earn over £100,000 a year, you remove a significant amount of your child support, which okay, that's a separate point, but if you've got two parents that earn £99,000 a year, you would still get it. But if you've got one out there working that earns 101 and a stay-at-home parent, then they don't get it. Well, that's just crazy. So there's so many examples like that across the tax system that just don't work. There's no common sense approach. There's no support. The grants there are lots of grants out there locally. Different councils have them, but again, they mainly support the technology sector and sort of energy initiatives, which doesn't always represent the everyday man and woman that's out there trying to make a living. So no, I've brought this up with people actually before on LinkedIn and stuff, but it's that, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this who is also a business owner will know this, because anytime you go and look for any kind of government aid or funding or whatever, it's always aimed at people who've got at least 3 employees and a turnover of £300,000 a year or whatever it is. And 74% of businesses in this country are essentially solopreneurs, right? They're people like you and I who we're not freelancers, but we're also not, we don't have a team and we don't have offices and we don't have, and to get the leap to that stage is so gargantuan. Now, I know what if you said that to a minister who's probably never run a business in his or her life, they're going to tell you, well, it's just like that 74% is such a vast chasm of different concerns that to vet them would be virtually impossible. There has to be some criteria we apply that you have to meet in order to then get, to be taken seriously. And I understand that. But the problem is you've got, that's what, 3/4 of all businesses in this country are floundering. And now the problem is they're being lumped in with the big ones as being, well, you're just a business. So there's no relief for you as, there's no help to get you to employ. If there was some sort of, whatever it is, way of getting, enabling us to employ people, which of course that's about to get much harder next week as we're talking. But if there were fewer barriers to employ people and support to help us do that, other than sort of apprenticeships and getting someone out of college, which frankly, no offence, but there's not going to be any help to me to get someone who I have to train. It just isn't. I need someone who can hit the ground running and work with me and essentially... Apprenticeships don't work at the moment either, because there's no incentive really for the employer. They spend a lot of time training people up. I speak to a lot of businesses that are interested in doing this, but they have to invest the first year or so, there's actually almost a loss for them in the time it takes to train them up. And then there's no sort of consequence at the back end. Those apprentices then leave potentially, and okay, you can create an infrastructure where you try and keep them, but ultimately there's no incentive at the back end to then help those employers want to keep those and bring on new apprentices. So that definitely is one side of things that just doesn't work at the moment. And you talk about the lending and the support. They did it with CBILS, so the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. That came into play, and that was ultimately like a handout and there was no real qualification of, if you applied, you pretty much got it. I don't know many businesses that didn't, and you sort of had £50,000 sitting there and pay it back as and when, and it was. And by the way, I don't think that is the way to lend out money and boost the economy. No. But somewhere along the line, if you could audit it and manage to inject cash for the right purposes and actually promote growth in the right way. I mean, even for employees, they've not increased the minimum threshold for PAYE, so it's still just over the £12,000 limit. So by increasing that national insurance, reducing the national threshold, so increasing that, that's just going to be knocked on.
Both.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you essentially what you're doing is that's just going to be passed on to the employees, and then we're going to see it in the bigger shops are going to be price hikes.
Yep.
So then actually on the money that you've paid tax on, you're then going to be paying more for your goods and services. So how they can spin that as being beneficial to the working middle class, it doesn't really work. It doesn't work for the business owner, and it doesn't work for the employees.
No, I mean it's a way. Again, you've eventually, because this happened under COVID as well. But it's a wage. What's it called? A wage spike or spiral or whatever. It's that thing of right. So prices are going to go up. More unemployment is going to go up. And wages are going to have to go up to compensate, because people then won't be able, anyone on the breadline is now going to get thrown into poverty or whatever you want to call it. These things are, I get it from a macro level. You're looking at it, if you're an accountant, you're going, we cannot keep borrowing at this, and that's absolutely true. We cannot keep borrowing at the rate we've been borrowing. Debt is now 100% of GDP or whatever it is. So something has to give, and I'm not making any kind of partisan point here, and I do think generally speaking there's a fag paper between them anyway, policy wise. I really don't think, and I'm not looking to litigate any kind of Labour versus Conservative thing, but because they're both having to do the same thing. But the point is that yes, I get something's got to give, but I think the mistake is thinking that the private sector can bear this, when actually it's been hit over the last half a decade. It's been hit with like blow after blow after blow, and like you say, government intervention generally, whether well intentioned or not, always ends up supporting big business and the those who can weather it. Because do I want to go down this route? No, I don't. But centralised decision making, let's put it that way, be that the EU or be that Westminster or whatever, the more centralised, and this is what I was taught in university, so, but the more centralised, obviously, the less granular it can be, and the more it damages small local business. But the more it plays into the hands of the lobbyists and the big companies, because, of course, they just send one person to one place to curry favour with the decision makers, who then litigate for a bigger and bigger space.
Absolutely, and because a lot of these big decisions, they don't affect the working man and woman on the street. They don't affect those SMEs out there, the businesses. Your green agendas might be great concepts, not yours, but but at the end of the day, if they don't work for the country, if they don't work, and if you're looking at a 20-year forecast, that doesn't help us today. And at what cost? And what are other countries doing that, and then taking advantage of our inability to then be charging higher gas prices and be charging a lot more, or taxing us more on our cars. It's now more expensive to go and buy a second-hand 10-year-old vehicle that's had a life and is being used than it is to go and buy something else. And you think, well, actually, you should be incentivizing recycling of that, and there's actually no real benefit to a lot of the those infrastructures that they put into place. And if you're going to go down that road, at least then make public services exceptional. Because if you're going to tax us high and you're going to go down green initiatives, then I want to be able to get on a tram at a low cost. I want to be able to get a train from one end of the country super quick and super cheap. I want cycleways. I want cutting through fields and that are going to, and no potholes. I want to have those initiatives put in place that are actually, okay, this is a high tax society, but I get a lot of public services. I've got family members that have had to have, they can't really afford private healthcare. They've not got private healthcare, and they can't really afford to take any private healthcare. But because of the waiting lists at the NHS, they've had to intervene and use their savings to go and get treatment immediately, to have operations, because if they don't, they'll be further down the queue, they'll be waiting, and actually, and they'll be in a critical condition. So we've got a lot of examples, and I'm sure a lot of listeners, and I feel we've gone quite negative here, and on the topic of me saying to remain positive. But I guess the point, rounding off on this podcast, is there is a lot of doom and gloom, there is a lot of negativity, and I think it's really important to stay informed and to know what's happening out there, and then to box that off and put that somewhere else, and then focus on what you can control, what are the measures that you can implement within your business, within your social environment, effectively make positive changes, and try and focus on that. Because there is, on a positive, to finish on a positive, there's a lot of information out there that hasn't been there before. There's a lot of technology, and there's a lot of low cost information that you can access and use to your advantage. And my recommendation to people is to surround yourself with that positive environment, stay informed, but don't dwell on it because it will drive you crazy.
Yeah, I think from a business point of view, I think you have to be across these things, because you have to understand. I mean, like I've certainly found in the last quarter that growth has slowed significantly, and opportunities have, there's been lots of great conversations, but getting I'm in a B2B space, trying to get people over the line has been very difficult, and that's because it's not just, it's the perception of things as much as anything else. Like in the autumn statement, right, which is now going to be enacted next week. We've known this is going to be on the cards for a long time. Now, it's not, these tax hikes and everything haven't come into play yet. They come in the new financial year, but of course, everyone's in anticipation of that. Everyone's buttoning down the hatches. Anyone who was thinking of maybe reaching out and doing marketing and maybe had some budget for marketing now has to reallocate that to paying their national insurance bill, that kind of thing. So that has been a knock-on effect for me. But then, like you say, it's like, well, okay, I can get annoyed about that, but short of voting for someone else, there's nothing I can do. So I have to look to other ways of maybe, and we are in a global society. A lot of services can be provided internationally now. I have clients in the States, and I'm looking at trying to grow that as well. And that's maybe something you have to think about. I don't know, but there are ways to mitigate these things. It's just like you say, it's that thing about worrying about what you can control and trying not to worry about what you can't. It's not always easy.
Well, I think that's a good teaser for future episodes, because we'll delve into more of those things, the tips, tricks and hacks that we're using today in our businesses. I've got a few good ideas for businesses and ways in which they can actively stand out in their market space, and we'll share those on future podcasts.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we hope this was informative and useful. If you haven't already, please like, comment and subscribe. All the usual things that everyone always says. Smash that like button, and I do mean smash. And we'll look forward to seeing you for another episode of Make It Your Business coming soon.